You join me here today in the rolling hills of Tanay with this, the GAC GS4. And I already know what you're thinking. It's a Chinese branded car, and you really have to lower your standards to find anything positive about it. But the thing is, Chinese cars have come a long way since we first saw them here like over a decade ago. So does that mean that the GAC GS4 breaks that, well, unfortunate stereotype and stigma from the past? Well, join me as we dig deeper and poke around this baby crossover from GAC. So first we start off with the styling, and I have to say the GS4 doesn't look like a blatant copy of anything like what Chinese automakers did back in the day. Now the game has moved on, and so has their styling game. Now I'll admit there are a few inspirations from European and some Japanese designers, but other than that it actually looks, well, pretty cohesive. It looks pretty good. And this shade of metallic purple, well, it's a pretty unique color option too. Now you have these headlights here that have some pretty neat detailing, such as the GAC badge on the corners and this bold grille, which adds a bit more presence to this rather small car. Now, a few things I did find amusing or interesting in this car is that it has a Trump Chi badge at the back and this LED daytime running light and fog light arrangement. So it's a Trump Chi because that's what it's called in its home market in China, and GAC is what it's branded outside of its home market. So that's out of the way. Now this time, the fog light and the LED daytime running lights are interestingly separated from each other rather than being integrated into the headlight. I just thought that's a bit of an unusual quirk right there. Now onto the sides, I see what they kind of did here. They tried to make it look sleeker by making the roof line taper downwards instead of being straight. Well, it's a nice touch. And what's also nice is the D-pillar treatment. It makes it look like it has a floating roof. Usually manufacturers do that floating roof thing at the front, but to see it at the back is, well, a pretty nice and neat touch. Now what's great about this GS4 is it has a 360-degree view camera, and that's something you don't see in its class at all. In fact, I believe it's the very first one with such features. There's a camera up front, on the side mirrors, and of course at the back to give you a better and clearer view of what's surrounding you in the car. Now, as for the rear, nothing really pops out aside from the license plate holder, which is located at the bottom of the bumper. Now there is, however, one caveat, and that's the tailgate release button. Now normally you'd find it on the garnish on the license plate holder, but because here the license plate holder is on the bumper, they had to move it elsewhere, and that's right on the tailgate. Now because of that, you have to press the tailgate release button and then sort of shove your fingers in the panel gap between the tailgate and the bumper. Now, and the problem is it doesn't pop up enough, so you're gonna get some dirty hands just opening the tailgate of this car. As for the feel of the cabin, well, where your hands usually go, the materials feel pretty good right here on the steering wheel, on the shift knob, and even where you plump your elbows. They're all trimmed in softly padded leather. But it's only when you start exploring around with your hands where you start to touch the hard plastics. But all in all, when you take a look at it, well, I have to say it's actually pretty impressive. Now, also the interior of the car is absolutely dominated by this huge infotainment screen, and it's about the size of an iPad mini. And like an iPad mini, there are loads of apps on board as well. Now you have navigation. When you enter your apps list, there's even Adobe Acrobat and Gmail, probably so you could read your emails while you're on the go. Of course, we don't advise doing that while you're driving. And another thing that's actually pretty nice about the infotainment system is it gives you real-time information on your engine, on your speed and all that, and it even measures your RPM to the exact ones digit. I find that pretty amusing. Now, of course, there's a lot more features in here, and well, sometimes it feels like a bit of an information overload, but perhaps if you get used to it for a little bit longer, it's just gonna be pretty intuitive. Now, speaking of big buttons, I also appreciate the steering wheel controls. Now, of course, standard in this car is cruise control and your audio controls on your left-hand side. You also have a sort of 8-bit display in the middle that serves as your multi-information display. And all in all, ergonomics, I have to say, is pretty straightforward. It's something similar to what you'd find in a Japanese car. The switches and the buttons and the lights and all that are exactly where you find them. Of course, last but not least are your entertainment options. You have an auxiliary port down there and a USB port to go along with it. And in the glove box, there are more USB ports to be seen. Now, for the seats, I have to say they're actually pretty plump and comfortable, especially in the lumbar area. Granted, it doesn't provide much support when you're gonna go spirited driving, but then again, it's a crossover. How many crossover owners are really gonna take this thing to the racetrack? Now, a few surprise and delight features here, of course. You have a sunroof as standards, and it's automatically powered. And curiously, there is a button that says Link and SOS here. Probably similar to like an onboard assistance system. Probably works for China only, but hopefully we'll never have to test that button ever. So that's the front covered. Let's go check out what's here at the back. Now, despite the compact dimensions of the GS4, there's a surprising amount of room here, and given that it even has a sloping roofline, I have loads of headroom here too. Now, legroom is actually very impressive here, probably because of the Chinese market's preference for more legroom here at the back. I could just absolutely stretch out here. Again, impressive given its compact dimensions. Couple of surprise and delight features. You have 2 USB ports down there. That means your rear passengers don't have to argue over one cord all the time. Also, I noticed there are curtain airbags here standard, a safety plus. And thankfully, there is an armrest with 2 extra cup holders. If that's not enough, there are also a pair of bottle holders on each side of the door. Now, another thing I hugely appreciate in the GS4 is the fact that you can recline the backrests. So you have loads of legroom and you can stretch out that little bit more. So you're kind of given the impression that the GS4 is made for the rear passengers. Further amping up the comfort here at the back are a pair of air conditioning vents right here. So all your passengers are always going to stay chilled no matter where they sit. Now, because of the length of the GS4, which sits somewhere between the B and C segments of crossovers, the trunk capacity is actually very good, easily swallowing a month's worth of groceries with great ease. If you need more space, you can even tumble down the second row seats. Now, if you're looking for an exciting driving experience that also blends in practicality, to be honest, you're not going to find it here in the GAC GS4. Well, the steering will be too light for those looking for a thrilling drive, and there's not much feedback coursed through the wheel. However, on the flip side, it does feel sure-footed and planted, especially that we're going up these winding roads of Tanay. I do have to make a comment about the brakes. And initially they'll feel deep, but you know that it'll stop you when you need them the most. Another thing that I do like about this GS4 is its performance. And thanks to that turbocharged engine, we're actually going up these hills with very little effort. That turbocharger is doing wonders for higher altitudes. There is a downside, however, to having this turbocharged engine, and that is fuel consumption. Now, we've been facing light to moderate traffic for the past couple of hours behind the wheel here, and it still only returned about 9 kilometers per liter. Now, you may see 9 kilometers per liter is pretty decent, but again, this is in pretty ideal conditions. I can only imagine the fuel consumption when you're out in the city. Another noteworthy thing about the GS4 actually is its sound isolation. Now, you'd expect a car made in China or a car sourced from China to be, well, pretty raucous, pretty noisy and all that, but I have to say the levels of refinement offered by this GAC is actually comparable to, well, more established brands and makes as well. Ride, on the other hand, is, well, pretty much on the firm side, although it's not totally uncomfortable. Now, when you're on asphalt, it rides really, really smoothly. And on roads like this, yeah, I feel the bumps and all, but it's not really sending shocks through my spine or anything like that. I have to say, yeah, it's firm, but that helps give it its sure-footed handling and feel. Now, the zero feedback and feels handling and steering aside, I do have to say that the GS4 feels pretty competent around the corners, well, thanks in part to that firm suspension. Yeah, it's not going to stir your loins in any way, shape, or form, but you have that peace of mind that the thing's just not going to tumble over when you take a corner a little too exuberantly. And speaking of exuberance, it reins it all in thanks to standard traction and stability control. That's always a benefit for any car, especially a family car like this. Now, there are 3 transmission modes for the GAC's transmission. There's economy, and there's manual mode, and normal mode. So normal mode, well, it is what it is. Normal, it's its most standard throttle mappings and transmission shift points and all that. Economy, well, you get slightly more sluggish throttle responses for the sake of better fuel economy, and it upshifts at an earlier RPM. Now, in manual mode, again, you have full reign over the engine. Now, unfortunately, it doesn't come with paddle shifters, or at least a plus-minus gate for the transmission. Instead, you're stuck with the button on the side of a gear selector with a plus-minus. I say manufacturers should stop doing that because it's just that tad bit more confusing. For me, paddles and a gated shifter feels just a little more intuitive rather than just pressing a button to upshift or downshift. But that's just me. Now, unlike most of its competitors, the GS4 is powered by a 1.5-liter turbocharged engine, and it makes as much power as a naturally aspirated 2-liter engine. It's good for 151 horsepower and, even more impressively, 235 Newton meters of torque. Transmission, on the other hand, is a 6-speed automatic with manual mode. So what do we think about the GAC GS4? Well, to be perfectly honest, it's not the kind of car that'll stir the soul or anything like that, but I don't think it was aimed to be like that. I think what GAC was going for was to pack in as much technology and features and connectivity in an affordable price. Now, I say affordable because for 1,188,000 pesos, you have a car with a full 360-degree camera, a full host of applications in its infotainment system, and even a turbocharged engine that has the same power output as your typical 2-liter engine. Now, on a value proposition, it's actually pretty good. But again, don't find much excitement in this one. But all in all, as a practical proposition and a value for money proposition, the GAC is actually a good one.